So, in this lesson, we will look at foreign influence on Zambia. So, in the first video, we're going to talk about how slave trade started. And in a second video, we'll look at the actual process of the slave trade. And in the third video, we're going to look at how slave trade was abolished or banned. Okay. So, how did slave trades develop? Okay, before we can look at slave trade, we need to talk about a slave. What is a slave? A slave is a person who works for free. Okay, a person who is legally owned by another person to do work without getting paid. This person is different from an employee because an employee works and gets paid, but slaves do not get paid. So slavery is the act of keeping slaves. So when we say slave trade, trading is buying and selling. So when we say slave trade, we're talking about the buying and selling of slaves. Okay. So for slave trade to happen, you need the person selling the slave and the person to buy the slave. So in this case, the Europeans were buying the slaves, the European explorers, and the Africans were the ones doing the selling. Okay, so they set up colonies in the Americas, Africa, and Asia. When they needed more workers in the colonies, they turned to Africa. So Africa was the source of labor. Okay, Africa was the source of labor. What were the motives behind slavery and slave trade? So there are three motives: social motive, economic motive, and political motive. So when we talk about social motive, we're talking about lack of labor force in the Americas. You'll find that after the World War, so many people were killed during that war. So it left a very huge population gap. Okay? As a result, they turned to Africa to get slaves. Okay? So Africa was going to provide the cheap labor because all in all, why are you going to pay employees when you can get someone to do the work for free from Africa? Okay. Then we have this priest called Bartholomew. This priest spoke against using local Europeans to do the work, but rather he advised that they should get labor, cheap labor or free labor from Africa. Okay. Then getting rid of undesirable members of society. So in the 16th century, in the 16th century, there were times when in the society you would have people who were labeled. Okay, let's say you over drink, you're a drunkard, you are labeled as useless in the society. So as a result, when these Europeans came, this would be a perfect opportunity to get rid of these people. Just sell them off as slaves because they were not adding any value to the community. Okay, so it was a way of getting rid of undesirable members of society. Let's say there was a person who likes smoking, or let's say insulting, makamaka insulting. This person loves insulting in the society, and then they are saying they want slaves. You're going to give up the person who's insulting in the society. Okay, so it was a way of getting rid of undesirable members in the society. Indentured servants who did not cope with tropical conditions. Okay, so there were local Europeans who could do the work, but they could not cope with the harsh weather conditions. So that is why they looked to Africa. Okay, then under economic motives, slavery was a way of making profit. Okay, so the chiefs would profit from the slaves because the white people would provide textile. What is textile? This is clothing. Imagine they bring you very nice clothes and you only wear pants. Definitely you will feel nice. Okay, salts, texture, which is clothing, and guns. Okay, gunpowder. All these things would make the chiefs happy and would result in the chiefs selling members of their kingdom. You're making noise. Okay, cheap labor needed for plantations. So Europeans had plantations where they were growing crops such as sugar canes, okay, and cotton. So they needed more people to work in these plantations, hence they looked to Africa as a source of labor. And also the role of the industrial revolution, okay. The more machines they made for the plantations and the industries, the higher the demand for labor. Okay, so all these points are falling under economic motives. Then we go to political motives. The country which had more slaves had more power because they had more people to do the work for them. So this would make the country even stronger. No wonder we have countries like Britain. You wonder to say, this country is very nice and it has been very nice for such a long time. What has been the reason? They would get cheap labor from Africa to do the work for them, okay? To do the building for them, the plantations for them. These people would have cheap labor to do everything for them, okay? Hence, they developed quickly. Okay, so those points are falling under political motives. So, what were the effects of slave trade on African society? What do you think is going to happen to your society? Okay, what is the difference between the country which is getting the slaves to do work for them and the country which is selling slaves? Number one, you'll find that before I can even read what's in the paragraph, you'll find that your population will decrease. Because what they will do is they will get the strongest members of their society. They'll get those men who are looking very masculine, very buffy, with so much muscles, and get them to go and do the work for them in their country. Now imagine if they get all your most capable men in the country. What are you going to remain with? You remain with the weak women and the children. So is your development going to be fast? No, because they've gotten your strongest people so that they can go and develop their own country. So the country which is buying these strong men is developing faster, okay? And then the country which is losing these men will not develop as much, okay? Because they've sold off their best people to do the work, all right? So let's look at what is said in the textbook. Number one, depopulation and destruction. This is exactly what I'm talking about. The population would reduce because many people were taken as slaves and others were killed due to slave capture. If you try to run away whilst they are capturing slaves, they'll just kill you because you're trying to make their work difficult. Introduction of new diseases. You see, if you've watched a documentary of how white explorers behave, they behave in such a funny way. You find a white person is sleeping with a monkey, sleeping with different animals. Definitely they will contract diseases that have never been there before. So if they now come to Africa and they find beautiful African women and they sleep with them, these women will contract diseases, and these women will now also infect the local people with the same diseases. So there was an introduction of new diseases such as syphilis. Before slavery, we never had such diseases. We never had HIV, gonorrhea, syphilis, but these diseases came as a result of the explorers during the period of slave trade. The white people are the ones that brought these diseases because of their funny way of living. Okay, destruction of culture or westernization. You find that these Europeans, when they came, those clothes they were bringing were not really modest clothing. Okay, so as a result, the culture was mixing up. Okay, so the slaves were exposed to European way of life. So those were the social effects of the slavery. Political effect: rise and decline of states. Definitely, when you have a population decrease and the best men in the country are taken away, you're not going to develop as much as you are going to. Increase slavery within Africa. Okay, so there were people who could manage to have their own slaves. They saw that since white people are getting slaves, I think we can also manage to get slaves to work in our farms for us or in our gardens. Okay, racist attitude. Europeans saw Africans only as slaves who were inferior. This is the period of time when we had inferiority complex. No, whites are better than blacks. Even after slavery was abolished, this idea is still on even up to today. Okay? Increased warfare and violence. Slave trade resulted in slave raid and violence. What is slave raiding? To raid, let's say there were times when the white people would get a whole boat of eligible black men, strong black men. Not all the people they got from Africa were successfully transported to America. Some would manage to fight the whites, fight them, kill them, and go back. Okay, but not all of them. But some of them would manage, and we call those raids. Okay. Then under economic effects, economically productive people were lost to the slave. This is the point I've already explained. Africa lost most of its productive manpower. The best of men from Africa were taken to work as slaves in America. Okay. Then introduction of European wealth or goods such as clothes, beads, guns, and gunpowder, and also new crops. So we were introduced to these new items. Decline of African crafts such as iron smelting, weaving, salt making because of labor force needed to work was taken away as slaves. We used to do all these things mentioned here before slavery. Okay, so this is all for this video. If you have any questions, you can ask. So what do you think was the main contributor to the slavery taking place? You can answer the questions below, okay? But personally, I feel like the chiefs were a major contributor. If they had their stand and had love for the people in their kingdom, they would not sell off their people as slaves. But since they only thought about themselves, okay, that was the main reason why slave trade happened.
So to defend themselves, guns, gunpowder.
What's that?
Gunpowder, so that they can defend themselves.
Gunpowder?
Yeah, so that those villagers, those chiefs, they can defend themselves. So they wanted gunpowder and guns. Yes, that's
to defend themselves.
Yes.
So as a result, they ended up selling their people. Okay, so in the next video, we're going to look at the actual slave trade. What used to happen during this slave trade. Okay, that is what we're going to look at.